China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Syria's President Assad begins his first visit to China in nearly 2 decades as world leaders gather for the opening of the Asian Games. Our other headlines: China tells the United Nations General Assembly the international security situation is grim and calls for an end to the fighting in Ukraine. One person reported killed in an attack on the headquarters of the Russian Black Sea Navy fleet in Crimea. And the controversy over e-bikes heats up. Experts say unregulated batteries are the reason so many bikes are bursting into flames. World leaders have started to arrive in China ahead of the opening ceremony of the Asian Games on Saturday. President Xi Jinping will be joined by leaders including Crown Prince of Kuwait, Cambodia's king, and South Korea's Prime Minister. The event, held in Hangzhou and running until the 8th of October, will be attended by more than 3,000 delegates from 35 countries. Well, among the leaders attending, Syria's president has arrived in China for his first visit in nearly 2 decades, as he seeks to try to end his government's diplomatic isolation under Western sanctions. Our correspondent Li Jianhua is following the story.
Yes, Jamie, the Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad was invited, along with a dozen other foreign leaders, to attend the opening ceremony of the Asian Games in the eastern Chinese city of Hangzhou. This is Assad's second state visit to China since 2004, and is a rare trip overseas for the Syrian leader, who is under sanctions from many Western countries for his role in the country's civil war and the export of illegal amphetamines. Assad met Chinese President Xi Jinping on Friday. The two jointly announced the establishment of the China-Syria Strategic Partnership, which means more active cooperation based on a mutually comprehensive understanding of each other's national security. And besides, they also signed various deals under the Belt and Road Initiative. President Xi said, I'm quoting, China supports Syria in conducting reconstruction, enhancing counter-terrorism capacity building, and promoting a political settlement of the Syrian issue following the Syrian-led and Syrian-owned principle. For his part, Assad said Syria appreciates China for its support for the Syrian people, and Beijing has played an important and constructive role in international affairs. So after attending the opening ceremony of this sports event on Saturday, we understand Assad is expected to visit several other Chinese cities. He's looking for help to rebuild Syria's economy ravaged by the civil war that has lasted for 12 years. And meanwhile, his trip outside the country is considered his latest effort to return to the international stage. China over the past years has played a key role in the Middle East by showing its principle of non-interference. So it helped with the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran earlier this year. And at the BRICS summit in September, 6 countries, including Iran, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, were invited to join the grouping, and they will become members next year. Back to you, Jamie.
Li Jianhua, our correspondent, thank you very much for that. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has just finished addressing the United Nations General Assembly. His appearance comes amid international outcry over his controversial judicial reforms and was met with protests outside the United Nations headquarters in New York. Well, our correspondent John Terrett is outside the UN. John, what did Mr. Netanyahu have to say in this speech?
Well, good morning, Jamie. We're coming to the end of this General Assembly, or it feels that way. Actually, that's not really true because it continues until Tuesday night, but we are at the prime ministerial level now, the minister level, that sort of thing. Most of the world leaders, as you just said in that first story, are moving on to be with President Xi at the Games. But we have had a very important world leader within the last half hour. Benjamin Netanyahu is the Prime Minister of Israel, and in his speech he touted a number of things, including the Abraham Accords, which Israel signed with the help of the United States, with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan and Morocco. He said the experts got it wrong. The experts said that there would never be peace with any Arab nation, not modern peace beyond the peace that they have with Egypt. unless there was peace with the Palestinians. And Netanyahu said that's just not true, as we have proved. And he said we're on the cusp of an even more historic age of peace, and that is a normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Now, the plan for this, they're planning a corridor. Joe Biden's in with this as well. They're planning a corridor that will link Asia with Europe, and it will go through Saudi and Israel, and it'll be maritime links, air links, fiber optic links, that sort of thing. And MBS, who's been in town this week as well, Mohammed bin Salman, the leader of Saudi Arabia, has said in the last couple of hours that this normalization of relations between Saudi and Israel is getting closer and closer. And I have to say, Benjamin Netanyahu sounded rather enthusiastic about this. He said peace between Israel and Saudi would change the Middle East. He said, but it must be based on truth, not lies. And on the issue of Iran, which I thought was the other big thing that he mentioned, he called Iran tyrants both at home and to the world. And Benjamin Netanyahu always does this. He always brings props. He's the only one, but he brings props. And he brought a couple of maps which he held up. And towards the end of his speech, he held up a map which showed you Iran and the wider Middle East to the left of it. And he put a red marker down the middle. And he said, look, if this peace deal with Saudi goes ahead, Iran is going to be isolated. So that was the tone of his speech. And he's just sat down within the last couple of minutes, Jamie.
And we've also heard from China's Vice President, Han Zheng. How was his speech received?
Well, Han Zheng is the Vice President of China, as you know. So he was here representing President Xi and the people of China, and he spoke yesterday. And the thing that struck me about the speech was it was very short. Some of these speeches seemed to go on and on and on, and in the case of Han Zheng, that really wasn't the case. A lot of it seemed to me to be based around sustainable development, particularly China's GDI goals, which is 2 years old now. The GDI is the global sort of development initiative which China is pushing Chinese best practices to other countries in the world, also global security, global civilization. He said the Belt and Road is 10 years old this year, and they've got 3,000 projects, which is remarkable. I think that is a truly extraordinary thing, and I'd tell you this, only China is the only country in the world right now that will be able to achieve something like this. These projects go from Asia, Africa, and all the way up to the northern part of Europe, as you know. He touched on Taiwan, and we think he used language that we haven't heard before. He talked about Taiwan being part of China since ancient times. I haven't heard him say that before, and nor have other correspondents here, so we think that's a slightly new tone. He also stressed that China is disinterested in hegemony, you know, where one country dominates another. No interest in that, said Han Zheng. He did say that China will always safeguard the homeland. And on the issue of human rights, he said it's up to each country what they do regarding human rights, and human rights should never be weaponized. Take a listen to what he said on that.
Ensuring a good life for people is the biggest human right. As countries have different histories, traditions and conditions, we must and can only explore a path of human rights development suited to our national conditions in response to the needs of our people. We should advance the international human rights cause through dialogue and cooperation, and oppose politicizing and double standards. In particular, the use of human rights and democracy as a political tool to interfere in the affairs of other countries.
Han Zheng speaking at the General Assembly yesterday, Thursday, and he concluded his remarks by saying that China is committed to opening itself up to the rest of the world. Jamie?
John, thanks for that. Our correspondent John Terrace at the United Nations in New York. One person has been reported killed in a missile strike on the headquarters of the Russian Black Sea Navy fleet in Crimea. Russia's defense ministry says 5 missiles were shot down over Crimea before landing, but Moscow-backed officials on the ground report buildings on fire after an explosion at the base in Sevastopol. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Megumi Lim in Kyiv. Megumi, this strike is said to have just taken place in the last couple of hours or so. What more are you hearing? What more do we know?
Well, Russia's defense ministry said that its air defense has successfully shot down 5 Ukrainian missiles aimed at Sevastopol, but the Ukrainian military said that at least one missile successfully struck this Black Sea Fleet command post near Sevastopol just a few hours ago, as you said. There's not a lot of information coming out just yet, and there's not much that we know about these attacks. But what we know is that these attacks is part of a recent series of attacks carried out by the Ukrainian forces against Russian military infrastructure in occupied Crimea. Just yesterday, an air base in the Saki region of Crimea was attacked. This base that is home to Russia's combat airplanes and also Russia's air defense systems. And just last week, a shipyard also in Sevastopol was attacked and 2 Russian vessels were destroyed. Now, analysts have said that Sevastopol, because it is home to Russia's Black Sea Fleet, should be one of the most heavily defended places. But the fact that Ukrainian forces have recently managed to successfully carry out these strikes calls to question the robustness of Russia's defense mechanisms and air defense systems there. However, Russian forces have also recently pulled out some of its ships from the Black Sea as a result of these attacks to the Sea of Azov, and this is exactly what Ukraine wants. Now, Crimea is a very important military and logistics hub for Russian forces fighting in Ukraine. And of course, for Ukraine, their objective is to try to cripple as many military infrastructure there and to try to weaken Crimea's role as Russia's military hub. And of course, ultimately, Ukraine is trying to retake Crimea, which was annexed by Russia in 2014.
Meanwhile, the first large grain ship to leave Ukraine for Africa set sail earlier, apparently in defiance of Russia's de facto ban on Black Sea crossings.
Exactly. This ship actually is the second cargo ship to do so. It's called Aroyat, and it is carrying 18,000 metric tons of grain, and it just left the port of Chornomorsk today. This is the second cargo ship to do so ever since Russia backed out from the Black Sea grain deal, which was brokered by Turkey and the UN last year. This Black Sea grain deal allowed for merchant ships passing through the Black Sea to and from Ukrainian ports to pass through safely to export Ukrainian food products. But since Russia backed out from this deal, it has said that any civilian ship passing through the Black Sea will be seen as a military threat. But Ukraine has remained defiant and is determined to find a new route, to establish a new route in the Black Sea for these merchant ships. This new route that they're trying out hugs the western coast of the Black Sea along Romania and Bulgaria, which are 2 NATO countries, and continues on to the Bosporus Strait in Turkey. But of course, this comes with a risk, because just last month, a Russian warship fired warning shots at a cargo ship passing through the Black Sea. Now, as I said, this is the second cargo ship. The first one, called Resilient Africa, left the port of Chornomorsk on Tuesday and has successfully safely arrived in Istanbul today. So this is a hopeful sign for Ukraine.
Megumi, thank you for that. Our correspondent Megumi Lim in Ukraine. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, China's ancient martial art of wushu, now an official subject at a university in China, and a major event of this year's Asian Games.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans, grey rhinos, and unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN. This week on Razor, the vault being built to preserve the diversity of our internal microbiota.
People that have a more traditional lifestyle, they have a much more diverse microbiome, and it's known that basically like the microbiome as we have it in the westernized world has been basically losing some of the microbiota that is also probably contributing to the fact that we have more non-communicable diseases.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Syria's President Assad begins his first visit to China in nearly 2 decades as world leaders gather for the opening of the Asian Games. Our other headlines: China tells the United Nations General Assembly the international security situation is grim and calls for an end to the fighting in Ukraine. And 1 person is reported killed in an attack on the headquarters of the Russian Black Sea Navy fleet in Crimea. Sanitation and access to clean water are the most urgent needs in the Libyan city of Derna. That's according to the International Committee of the Red Cross, which has deployed teams to the flood-hit area. This comes as the UN's migration organization says 43,000 people have been displaced after 2 dams burst and flooded the city 2 weeks ago. Thousands of people were swept out to sea. The official death toll now stands at 3,300, but up to 10,000 people remain missing. Well, Italian emergency crews working in Derna say the scale of the devastation is unparalleled. Italy has important ties to Libya, which is one of its biggest suppliers of gas and oil. CGTN's correspondent Hermione Kitson now reports.
Around 2 weeks after Storm Daniel descended on the port city of Derna, the true scale of the devastation is yet to be fully understood. Italian search and rescue crews were among the first to arrive, and Luigi D'Angelo from the Italian Department of Civil Protection says it was one of the most difficult situations they have faced.
We were initially equipped for search and rescue in water conditions, but the scenario that we have in front of us once we get there was the one of sort of an earthquake.
Italy has so far sent military jets and a naval vessel with personnel and equipment. The World Health Organization says at least 4,000 people have died, a figure that is expected to rise. Relief efforts are complicated by the country's political tensions. It's been divided and ruled by separate governments in the east and west for over a decade.
Initially, the conditions were very tough, really tough. And of course, even a contest, which is not very easy to handle with because of the past war, because of the army that are controlling the territories.
In the immediate aftermath of the tragedy, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni spoke to both the leader of Libya's National Unity Government and also his political rival, pledging Rome's full support for the divided nation.
Italy has always played an important role in Libya's relations with Europe.
There is, of course, a serious intellect and political and economic interest because we take a good deal of our oil from Libya.
In January, Prime Minister Meloni travelled to Tripoli to sign a major gas deal, while in May she met with the Libyan National Army chief in Rome to discuss migration, as the country is a key transport hub for those seeking to enter Europe.
Libya is taking money from European countries in order to keep, especially from Italy, in order to keep irregular immigrants in their country.
But despite political upheaval and uncertainty, the people of Libya stand united in their bid to recover.
And what I found there was really a gratitude from the people, from the Libyan people, because they are living this tragedy with a lot of dignity.
Responding with grace when faced with unprecedented devastation. Hermione Kitson, CGTN, Rome.
Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has called on India to cooperate with an investigation into the murder of a Canadian Sikh leader in British Columbia. He said that Ottawa had credible allegations linking India to the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar in June, but that Canada would not release its evidence. Delhi has strongly denied any involvement. Strikes at 2 LNG plants in Australia have been called off after new proposals were put forward on pay and conditions. Benchmark natural gas prices in Europe eased after jumping more than 30% last month. The 2 Chevron plants off Western Australia account for more than 5% of global LNG supplies, and the dispute had threatened supplies ahead of winter. US auto workers say they plan to extend their strikes that have brought production to a halt at 3 car makers ahead of a deadline for talks with management. Over 12,000 people are taking part in coordinated stoppages at General Motors, Stellantis and Ford. They're protesting over a wage deal that they say unfairly discriminates against older staff. Unions seeking pay rises and a shorter working week will make their announcement later on Friday. E-bike and e-scooter fires have caused 190 injuries and 8 deaths in the UK over the last 3 years, and concern over the safety of their lithium-ion batteries is rising. Our correspondent Alex Isaac reports.
This is a damaged e-bike battery. Within minutes, the temperature has already exceeded 600 degrees as toxic smoke rises and flames fly in every direction. Fires sparked by lithium-ion batteries in e-bikes and e-scooters have resulted in 8 deaths and at least 190 injuries in the UK since 2020. In London, the fire brigade has attended an e-bike or e-scooter fire once every 2 days. Experts say these fires are preventable and blame cheap, unregulated or damaged batteries and bad chargers for the blazes.
If you treat them with respect and use them properly, they're not going to burst into flames. That's just not going to happen. There has to be something that actually negatively affects the batteries, being overcharged, being hit by something. That's where the problems start. At the moment, there's a difference between what would be the branded and acceptable quality offerings on the market versus the temptation to buy stuff that seems to be cheaper, but actually you're getting considerably less product for it. We have traceability of our batteries all the way down to the cells that are used to make those batteries, I think, and those cells are safe and built to a certain safe specification. So if you buy any of these other bikes, they will have the same traceability of the individual cells. There are, in the world, lots of budget cells that are probably less safe and less regulated.
A report by charity Electrical Safety First is looking for e-batteries to be regulated like every other electrical good. But services like London Fire Brigade are working with e-sellers to ensure that people understand what they must do if they have an e-battery at home.
If you're buying second-hand, you don't know how the person before you treated that battery. You don't know how they charged it, what conditions they rode the battery in, whether it was ever submerged in water. If you have one of these products in your home, you just have a responsibility to yourself to make sure that you've done some research on the battery and that you are choosing a charger that actually kind of meets the voltage and the amp hours of the battery itself. So the most dangerous thing happens when you kind of constantly overload these batteries with the wrong charger.
Until those regulations are enforced, advice from experts to ensure that you protect yourself and your home is to always follow safety advice. Alex Isaac, CGTN, London.
The Chinese martial art of Wushu is gaining more fans outside the country, so much so it's made it into this year's Asian Games, and you can even now study the sport at a university course in Beijing. Our correspondent Cao Bing reports.
The Chinese Kung Fu is much more well known as Wushu, or martial art in China. Through many years, Chinese Wushu become more developed and popular. People can find powerful skills and fight scenes in Kung Fu films, splendid performances on stages, and fierce competition in sports events. Former world champion in Wushu Zhao Qingjian, now a Wushu teacher, says in China, that is not the whole of it.
Martial arts can be divided into 4 categories: traditional martial arts, competitive martial arts, such as competitions in Asian Games or World Championships, which is leading the direction of martial arts development. Wushu for fitness, such as Tai Chi. And the fourth category is a martial arts in films, televisions, and on stages. So I believe it is safe to say Wushu has become an authentic part of Chinese culture, portraying a healthy lifestyle, nurturing both body and mind.
Zhao says, as it has gained widespread appreciation around the world, it offers an in-depth window into Chinese culture.
Wushu is cool, often exhilarating, amazing to watch, with mesmerizing defensive moves. But as a unique Chinese sport or cultural art which has developed for over thousands of years, it also contains profound spirit, wisdom, and philosophy.
Zhao took us to demonstrate on a Wing Chun wooden dummy.
Wing Chun is a very distinctive style of Wushu, and its movements are relatively in a small range. It emphasizes not to use any muscular force, but to conjugate with the mind and to work out the source of power. It is about simplicity, directness, and efficiency that makes it possible for the weak to overcome the strong.
He says examples are countless, which makes practitioners, regardless of gender and age, become obsessed with the exercise and the culture behind them. His words were echoed by his students, who expressed their love of the sport. And their dreams are big. They wish that the beauty of the sports can be enjoyed by more and more people. Cao Bing, CGTN, Beijing.
And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Hello and welcome to the weather forecast. I'm Jenny. Well, over to Europe. Wet weather will continue here for a large portion of Europe over this weekend, and most of them will be in the form of some light to moderate intensity of rain with localized heavy to torrential amounts of rain, setting the stage here for portions of the northwest of the Balkans. And notice that some clear skies are likely to return here for the majority of both France as well as Germany on Sunday, so please well plan your outdoor activities over this weekend. And temperature-wise, we're likely to see some cooler temperatures setting the stage here for a large portion from the north all the way down towards into the south on Saturday. And after the drop, most of the high temperatures for UK, France, as well as Germany will be ranging between the upper teens to the lower 20s for both Saturday and Sunday. But notice that here for the majority of the Balkans, especially for the southern portion of the Balkans, we'll continue to see the high temperatures a bit higher than the average level, ranging between 30 to 35 degrees Celsius. So please try the best to stay cool. And about business and travel, for the major cities up in the north, clear skies for Stockholm in the morning hours with a high of 18 degrees Celsius on Sunday. And down to Minsk, we'll see chance of showers in the morning hours with a high of 24 and low about 11 degrees Celsius. And that is all from me. Stay tuned for more City Forecast.